Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for waiting. This is David Cuartielles, co-founder of Arduino, and I'm here today both as the co-founder of Arduino, of course, but also as a very concerned human being about what's going on in the world because of the current COVID disease. So now I want to welcome you all to this session. As you see right now, we have the agenda online, and in this agenda, we're basically showing how it's going to happen in the next couple of hours. We're going to first going to be in this plenary session. We will be presenting the an introduction to what Arduino is doing and the Arduino community is looking into. Also, after me, we have invited Robert Reed to make a speech called Open Source Hardware for the Emergency. He's been making a very well-known study right now about 16 tools for ventilation. I think almost everybody in this call has read already, but I think it's great to have the author to come and speak and present his views on the topic. Directly after that, we're going to cut the room into two different parallel tracks. On the room number one, we will be talking about Arduino compatible ventilators, and room number two, we will talk about other Arduino compatible medical devices. In the agenda, you will find the links to each one of the rooms. Room number one will be this one we're in at right now. Room number two will be hosted by Alessandro Anellucci, one of the Arduino makers community leads, or the Arduino community lead, actually. And after that, at 7, we'll start a second session. We will be looking at the legal and technological challenges. And in that session, I will be hosting the first one, legal and certification challenges. And the second one that will again be led by Alessandro Anellucci will feature Dario Penisi, who is Arduino's lead of hardware and firmware development, who is going to be talking about what Arduino in this field can do for you. For the sessions, we have invited a whole bunch of players from all over the world, and we are really glad about the great attendance that has emerged in like no time. So we're first going to start with this plenary introductory session, and I will just briefly make the pitch of why Arduino is relevant in this situation, and then I will open the floor for Robert. So the world is facing this unprecedented crisis. You know, everything has changed in the last couple of months. We've gone from having planned a lot of things, from being able to planning what we're going to do tomorrow to planning whether we're going to eat somewhere or whether we're going to be doing whatever in summertime. And all of those things have been thrown into the trash can, and we'll be forced to rewrite our everyday life from scratch again. As of today, COVID-19 has been diagnosed to almost 1 million people, and we know this is just the tip of the iceberg because many countries are not even doing the proper testing. And I'm living at one of those, by the way. This disease has managed to put the whole world into a recession, both economically, but also, I would say, emotional recession. People are trapped. They don't know exactly what to do. They don't know how to react. And I think everybody is emotionally touched by the situation. In a sense, COVID-19 has stopped our life as we know it. So who doesn't want to help under these circumstances? Who doesn't want to be doing something for your neighbors, for people in your community, people out there, anybody? So we also want to help, but there's challenges. As technologies, the challenges we face is that designing first ventilators to any kind of other tools, they have to be done in record time because we're fighting against something we didn't know how it worked before. So now we have to work with something that even is forcing us to work on distance from one another, and distance is actually making things very difficult. We have to work getting access to hardware resources worldwide during a lockdown. It's really hard to transport things from A to B, it's really hard to source materials, and really hard to manufacture things in the way we were doing just barely a month ago. And we're also facing legal regulation limitations. Of course, our governments want to do the best for us, and they want to take care of our health. And therefore, there is regulations that are making very complicated for many of us to join the discussion about which tools could be convenient to fight against COVID-19. So the Arduino community stands up to the challenge. We've seen plenty of projects from teenagers doing motor controlled soap dispensers to teams of university researchers and doctors working in making life-saving respirators for intensive care units. So we want to join this conversation, and we've been working in the shadows for the last 2 or 3 weeks, helping different groups, giving advice, and eventually even donating some materials. So we've been asking ourselves what we as Arduino can do in this situation. First of all, we think that the open hardware community of which Arduino is part of is in the position of contributing by offering a great technical know-how to groups and individuals that are in advanced phases of projects. I mean, I don't want to sound bad about this, but of course we need to give priority to those that are closer to an end because time is at the essence. We can also give great supply chain advice to those willing to move beyond the prototype level and into production. We at Arduino are making thousands of boards on a day-to-day basis, and we've managed to make our systems classify for medical supplies, which means we're in a situation where we can help you think about how you want to build your things. But it's very important to think about which kind of processors you want to use, which kind of boards you're interested in using, and which kind of software you're writing. Because if everybody trying to scale using the same tools, it might be facing a problem from the supply chain worldwide. And also we want to help out throughout these distributed delivery channels. As you know, we're partnering with a lot of companies, like the largest hardware resellers in the world. And all of them are really willing to help together with us in helping you getting things done in record time. So we're here to join forces with you against COVID-19. So this was my introduction, but before we move on into the next session with Robert Reed, I want to remind you that Arduino, being one of the most distributed hardware piece in the world, has of course inspired a lot of people, but also has put everybody in front of using the same piece of technology in a way. So we have to think about how to diversify our efforts. And it will be very important if you thought about which are the main features you want for your designs and how you would like to move on from here and think about what is best for you, best for your work, best for your team, but also best when thinking about scaling. And I really want to invite you to have this conversation with Dario Penisi. I would invite all of the ventilator groups to have one person in the legal track, and also one person in the technology track during the last sessions. And that said, I will stop sharing my screen and open the floor for Robert, who is going to be delivering his lecture, Open Source Hardware for the Emergency. So give a virtual hands up for him, and let's open the floor.
I unfortunately can only speak to one thing which I've been focusing on, which is ventilators. And I'm going to talk about ventilators. This title slide probably should mention ventilators. I run a charity in the United States called Public Invention, and most of my work in the last 2 or 3 weeks has been within coronavirus.org. The Arduino is popular. Probably 80% of the open source ventilator projects use Arduino. The only really buildable one that I'm aware of right now, the AMBO vent, uses a Nano. Yesterday, Medtronic's open sourced a lot of their stuff. It uses a PIC. I've been keeping track of, as best I can, of all of the efforts. I have a spreadsheet here with a lot of different efforts. Most of the ones which use a microcontroller at all, not all of them do, use an Arduino. So the question is, what should the Arduino community do with respect to ventilators to try to help? And I think they should do what they always do: build libraries, hardware modules, tutorials, protocols, and standards. Fundamentally, the problem of ventilators is to control air. It seems very simple, but that's the truth. But the pressure, flow, and volume must be controlled very precisely. It is a fact that the acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, which is the primary thing which kills you if you have COVID-19, requires very careful control of pressure and volume. If you blow too much air into the lungs, or you blow too hard, or you blow too quickly, you damage the lungs. And these are people who are paralyzed and helpless when they're intubated. So any mistake can be a fatality. And a software bug in Arduino code here could lead to a fatality. So Arduino can be the heart of a modular ventilator architecture platform. Commercial ventilators had little reason to be modular and open. They were selling devices for more than $25,000, and they specifically didn't want to do that, make it modular. Their systems are highly optimized, and no doubt they were very good at what they did. But a modular architecture would allow us to deal with supply chain disruptions. Now, you might think it's impossible to do that in this case, but in actuality, almost all ventilators they're fairly simple devices. I have attempted to create this abstract model of a ventilator, and I'm sure David wants me to go fast, so I can't talk about it too much. But basically, ventilators are not that complicated. There aren't that many components. There are only so many places where you can measure pressure, for example. And so, in a sense, one of my friends, Naram Pushan, talked about the robotic operating system. We could build sort of a ventilator operating system, which could modularize this whole effort. So what should the Arduino community do? It should build libraries to control air, hardware modules, printed circuit boards and sensors to control air, tutorials to control air, and protocols and standards related to this specialty, which is very similar to what is always done. So I want to throw out some ideas. I'm not an expert, and I'm not an electrical engineer, by the way, but these are things ways in which we could share as a community without decreasing our diversity. We could have multiple solutions to these problems. From a software point of view, we need online on the Arduino, but online, I use online in the old community sense, not as on the internet, but a algorithm which can process data as it comes in 100 times a second. It can process a new pressure and flow sample. And the nice thing about this domain is you really don't have to sample more than 100 hertz, I think. You don't have to deal with enormous quantities of data. But we need breadth standards. And we also need test software for sophisticated burn-ins. So this is a screenshot I took this morning of the VentMon system that I'm working on. It just shows that when you deal with ventilators, you're dealing with flow, volume, and pressure curves. We need a standard way to interchange and talk about flow, volume, and pressure curves, and also oxygen, hydrogen, other kinds of events, so that one team could build a test or analysis system while another team is building a data collection system. The Arduino community has already done this. We're very used to creating standards which allow interchange of data. We just need to now make ventilator-specific standards if we're going to talk about ventilators. There are many ways an Arduino could be used for something that's not an Arduino, a ventilator, but I can't speak to that. So we also need modularization of hardware, modular air control, by which I mean you can provide the force to push air into someone's lungs in different ways. You can use a pump, you can squeeze a bag, you can use a motor, you can use a fan, you can use compressed air, but all of them have to be controlled in some way. If we had modular air control, you could change that. And ideally, it wouldn't matter if you were using a pump or compressed air. We particularly need a flow analyzer, ventilator tester, ventilator monitor, and I've created a project to work on that. The basic issue here is because these are life-critical systems, they're always monitored in a critical care situation. In a well-functioning hospital, telemetry sends information to a nurse's station. If something goes wrong, it beeps or alarms and screams at them, and the nurse can go change something. It's even more important when we are making machines which had not gone through a lengthy qualification quality assurance process, that we have that kind of monitoring as a backup. So this is just an idea. I don't want this to be taken too seriously, but David asked, how could the Arduino community play in this? This is an example of something that almost every ventilator project could use. And, I buy a lot of things from, let's say, Adafruit or whatever. I've got a flow sensor from Adafruit right here. If I had this, I think a lot of ventilator projects could benefit from it. Basically, you want to plug something into the standard 22 millimeter airway, which is used for patients, that has redundant pressure sensors. And in breathing, what's important is not the absolute pressure or the atmospheric pressure. It's always the pressure relative to the outside ambient air. So the tube, which is going down the throat of the patient, inside that, the pressure is different than the pressure outside. What you really want is something which would reliably measure that. And unfortunately, sometimes those things get wet due to condensation. Sometimes the patient vomits, other things can happen. So what I would like, this is just an idea. I don't want anyone to really build this, but this is just an idea of what you could do, is you could build a physical device that you plug into the airway that has 3 sensors on the outside sensing ambient air and 3 sensors on the inside sensing airway air. Have a circuit which does a voting algorithm if one of the sensors is off, subtracts them, and sends the difference via I2C to an Arduino. And the beauty of that system is then the Arduino doesn't have to use software to decode the pressure differential. Presumably it would be more reliable because once this module is fully tested, everybody can rely on it. So finally, ventilators are life-critical machines. Reliability is absolutely key, and that means both software and electrical. I believe the way that we can address this is through redundancy. Arduinos are cheap. There's no reason not to use 3 of them if it's going to make your machine more reliable. So unlike my perception of the Arduino hobby universe, which has made cheap and flexible multifunction things, this domain requires a different mindset. And believe it, it's hard for me because I'm mostly a computer programmer. I'm very fast and very sloppy. I am a terrible person to work in this domain. Nonetheless, I'm trying. Reliable is better than cheap, and simple is better than multifunction. I know we need cheap ventilators in this situation, but it doesn't do any good if we kill the patient. Even in the places that I personally believe are going to be very hard hit, like India, we have to build reliable machines. And so my advice in this realm is harden, harden, harden. It needs to be so hard a meteor will bounce off it. I personally don't know how to do that, but I'm here to learn. I know everyone probably listening to me is doing their best as well. And that ends my presentation. Back over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you so much. I think it was a very good introduction. I wouldn't say I was missing your famous table that everybody are looking at every now and then, but I guess it will be time to look at it later. Before we move into the rooms, we are running just a couple of minutes. Right now it's just the right time, but I would like to address a couple of things. First of all, if anybody has any questions, we have this Slack channel where all the questions are like sent back to me. So if there's any questions for Robert, please bring them up in any of the channels we are listening to. We have people both on YouTube, Facebook, the Zoom channel, and so on. So we can just bring up the questions. So there is mostly comments. People have been reading reports all over the world. And so there's comments I will just bring up so that everybody are aware of them. For example, Marcos Mendez mentions that AmbuVacs are not available on 3/5 of the world cities and small villages. That's why AmbuVent will not solve the problem. So that's a comment that related to one of the projects that is running around. Then there is people mentioning that it's proven that CPAP machines with continuous pressure generate an inflammatory case on the patient and increases the recovery, or even it's why Italy had so many casualties. Well, I want to say that, of course, there is a lot of reports that we have, some of us have read, so it's important that we keep track of all of the reports because research is happening as we go. And so it's important to keep this in mind. So it's not an easy thing to just be updated. So Robert, I just wanted to ask actually in this topic, being updated, like how do you keep updated? Because you have like probably the most thorough study. Are you working alone? Are you working with somebody? How are you collecting the data for your study?
Well, I'm in the Slack channel at incoronavirus.org. There are other communities. I've got a list of communities at my website that list resources. So I started out getting a lot of that. Since I published my spreadsheet, people have been sending me GitHub issues and emails asking to add their projects, and I'm happy to do that, although it's hard to keep up with. So I've been relying on those people, and communities are also a good way for most of the people on this call are probably not medical professionals, to find medical professionals who can at least answer questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this up. I think that's very important. We will bring this up in the next session, but we were attending a meeting with the Spanish agency for the medicine and medical products early this week. And it was very clear to me that among the over 40 projects that showed up in Spain to this meeting, only those that had been working with doctors and medical professionals from day one stand a chance of being approved for medical trials. So I think it's very important. So right now I'm sharing the schedule to the conference. Thank you, Robert. We invite you to stay with us throughout the conference. I would really love you to be at the ventilator session with me. So if you want to stay, please stay with us. I'm sure you will get some new projects for your list